The Jura Mountains, located between Switzerland and France, yielded numerous fossils from the Jurassic period, which spanned from 201 million to 145 million years ago. Since these fossils were found in the Jura Mountains, the entire period was named the Jurassic period. Research on the fossils from this era revealed that around 199 million years ago, there were many ferocious dinosaurs that hunted by throwing venom at their prey to paralyze them. Additionally, there were creatures during this time that could easily chew and digest the thick skin or spikes present on their prey's body. In short, if I were to summarize this entire period in one line, the Jurassic period was an era when massive dinosaurs began to unlock their potential. This is because it is the second part of our dinosaur series, and before moving forward, let's recap the previous episode, which is the Triassic period. In the previous video of this dinosaur series, we saw that around 200 million years ago, the Camp or CMP region was experiencing continuous volcanic activity that began to make the Earth's climate toxic once again. It became so toxic that there was neither fresh air left to breathe nor water to drink, leading to the extinction of 80% of life. Only the dinosaurian archosaurs, sauropods, and theropods survived, along with flying pterosaurs, aquatic ichthyosaurs, and plesiosaurs, and small mammaliomorphs, which would later evolve into the major dinosaurs of the Jurassic period. Now, these dinosaurs survived the Triassic extinction event, known as T2, but the domino effect of S2 led to the onset of a new mass extinction. The most significant of these mass extinctions was called the anoxic extinction, which marked the beginning of the Ronical Jurassic period. The carbon dioxide released from T2 produced large amounts of toxic gases that raised temperatures to such an extent that the oceans became stratified. Basically, this means that three distinct thermal layers were created in the oceans. Due to these different layers, where ocean currents used to travel downwards to supply oxygen for deoxygenation, they began to travel in a left-right direction instead. As a result, the supply of oxygen for deoxygenation was completely cut off. Marine animals began to struggle to breathe. Seeing the deteriorating condition of the ocean surface, marine dinosaurs, ichthyosaurs, and plesiosaur evolved to save themselves by living in deeper waters. This was done because, as the temperature increases, the kinetic energy of the maximum oxygen molecules and higher kinetic energy causes the intermolecular bonds of the O2 molecules present in the liquid to break, allowing them to escape from the liquid solution. But in cold water, the intermolecular bonds become stronger, why they move to deeper waters. On the other hand, small fossorial mammals evolved to live underground to escape rising temperatures, and some mammaliforms became involved in fossorial mammals. As for the sauropod theropods living on land, they adopted an interesting evolutionary tactic known as the Lilliput effect. Under this effect, they reduced their size because, as I mentioned earlier, the oxygen concentration was rapidly decreasing during that time. At the cellular level, ATP is produced using O2, providing energy to the cells. If the oxygen concentration decreases, less ATP is produced, giving the cells less energy. To avoid this energy deficiency, if organisms reduce the number and size of their cells so that their cells can survive on less energy, it would provide a significant benefit to their survival. Exactly this happened with these organisms as well, where sauropod theropods were involved, and there the theropods divided themselves into two groups, Dilophosaurus and Coelophysis. Now, the second reason behind adopting this structural evolution was that small size is beneficial from a reproductive point of view, as small organisms can give birth in just 21 days. In comparison, elephants take 22 months to give birth. In other words, these short organisms focused entirely on reducing their size and increasing their numbers. Naturally, this entire process took millions of years. During those millions of years, the Earth began to take on the form of a paradise. Once again, and in this paradise, carnivorous dinosaurs like Dilophosaurus and Coelophysis reigned. Among them, Dilophosaurus was notorious for spitting venom at its prey. Upon spotting its target, it would paralyze the prey by spitting venom, and then finish it off in one swift strike with its sharp teeth. One competitor of this was Coelophysis, which could slice the legs of large animals into small pieces. It was exactly like how piranhas behave today. which chew on the remains of other living fish when they are hungry. At that time, the fear of these carnivores was so great that the mammals, which had evolved to try living on land, adapted themselves to reside in the tall trees of the tropical forest. In evolution, these mammals diverged from their ancestors, so scientists had to divide them into two categories. The first, Volaticotherium, developed a web structure between its hands to glide from one tree to another without touching the ground, while the second, Agilodon, became a super-fast climber so that it could quickly climb a tree at the sight of threats from Dilophosaurus and Quilophysis. However, their evolution did not benefit them much. Rather, this evolution increased one more threat for them, and that is because a predator was already lying in wait on the tall trees. The threat to mammals increased because pterosaurs ruled the skies. These pterosaurs would hide in tall trees, waiting for their prey, and as soon as they spotted a mammal climbing the tree, they would swoop down and catch them with their long beaks. Eventually, over time, their prey's numbers began to decline. Now, since the number of mammals in the forest had decreased, the pterosaurs left the jungle in search of prey and moved to the floodplain. Now, there was no role for gliding wings here, so natural selection occurred, which led them to develop larger and longer wing valves over time. During this evolution, the structure and genetics of pterosaurs underwent so many changes that scientists had to divide these pterosaurs into two groups. Dimorphodon and Pterodactylus did not dominate this region for long, because the simultaneously occurring Earth's orbital changes were writing the story of their demise. In fact, at that time, the Earth's orbital eccentricity was much higher compared to today. But let's make a short call. Once, the orbital eccentricity of Earth was more electrical than it is today. This means that when the Earth was at its farthest point from the Sun in its orbit, it received 23% less solar radiation compared to today. These orbital changes triggered a 1 ice age on Earth that lasted for millions of years. During this time, the remaining crocodiles began to die out in the Triassic. Because ectotherms like Tom's Slasher are cold-blooded, their body temperature is dependent on the environment. Only a few crocodiliforms that migrated relatively towards the warm regions survived, and these creatures eventually evolved into today's model crocodilians, along with the Ice Age theropods. This led to the extinction of many species. Now, where the sauropods were struggling between life and death, on the other side, the Agilodon smartly evolved itself along with the other creatures. They also divided into two categories. Number 1, Castorocodata, and number 2, Megacod. And then, as soon as ISIS ended, the tropical forest began to flourish once again, and the remaining theropods and sauropods were seen roaming in these forests. Since there was plenty of food and proper nutrients, the sauropods, which had shrunk in size due to the Lilliput effect, started to grow again. However, this increase in size caused them problems in locomotion, meaning they had to minimize their movement to reach food. The best option was to extend their necks to eat from the tall conifer trees present in the forests. Therefore, sauropods increased their size again and evolved into the Cetiosaurus and Rhotosaurus, becoming the largest dinosaurs of the Jurassic period at 7 to 8 meters long. Before long, the number of sauropods began to increase as they gained a huge advantage, and the trees started to diminish. Naturally, this led to a subsequent shortage of food, prompting the remaining ornithischians to reduce their size for survival. They adapted to feed on plants like zinc, goss, and benititails that grew on the ground, and they used the energy obtained from these plants for their protection. This was because although both sauropods and ornithischians were herbivores and food for theropods at that time, the larger size of the theropods led them to primarily hunt only ornithischians, leaving the sauropods alone. Consequently, ornithischians focused all their strength on strengthening their defense, developing shaped plates on their backs and spiked valves for protection, thus becoming the Stegosaurus. Now, it was nearly impossible for theropods to attack these Stegosaurus. Observing the evolution of their prey, the theropods deemed it necessary to evolve as well over time. In response to the evolution of their prey, they replaced their valves and evolved into the Dilophosaurus. During this revolution of dinosaurs, plants were also gradually showing evolution and transforming into flowering plants. In fact, due to the lack of dry conditions in the tropical environment, wind pollination was limited, which severely affected gymnosperms that relied on wind for pollination. For this reason, at this point, in the equatorial Gondwana, some plants evolved that began to attract these insects through flowers, leading to the emergence of the first NGO. Through insect pollination, these plants began to spread across all other land masses of Gondwana. Now that the plants have evolved into flowering plants, their quantity and size have increased, and the energy from them increased. As a result, the consumers that depended on these plants also grew larger. Those feeding on plants evolved into Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus, and as they grew larger, they became prey for the Dilophosaurus. The large and fearsome Allosaurus was considered by scientists to be one of the most intelligent dinosaurs of its time, which preferred to hunt Stegosaurus, who had spikes, plates, and a tail. During all this evolution, the most drastic changes occurred in the dinosaurs that lived in the polar region. They developed feathers to protect themselves from the cold and transformed into the first model birds. Actually, dinosaurs had scales on their bodies which could not regulate temperature effectively in the polar environment. This is why dinosaurs living in the polar region began to fly due to genetic plasticity, meaning they experienced environmental pressure that led to changes in their bodies. For instance, Lamarckism, fueled by natural selection, caused their scales to start transforming into feathers. You can understand the stages of this transformation by looking at these images. They are all similar, because their primary function is to protect the body and prevent external heat from entering. In other words, the primary function of feathers is thermoregulation. This is why feather fibers began to develop over the scales of dinosaurs in the polar region. And through natural selection, these traits started to be passed on to future generations. According to cursorial theory, dinosaurs glided through the air while catching their prey with the help of their wings. And eventually, some dinosaurs learned to fly while gliding, branching off into the first sisters of modern birds like Archaeopteryx. Its size was comparable to that of a modern crow, and it would glide from one branch to another. Everything was going well. Dinosaurs had branched out into modern birds, and there was an abundance of diverse life on Earth. However, about 155 million years ago, a major extinction event occurred, leading to the extinction of 55% of species. Yet, this extinction event was what eventually gave rise to the most famous dinosaurs, including Allosaurus and Velociraptor, marking the beginning of the golden period for dinosaurs during the Cretaceous period. But more about that in the next video, friends. Dinosaurs, the fall, and along with that, friends. If you haven't watched the previous video in the series, I highly recommend you check it out. Through this series, I want to clear all your misconceptions about the concept of dinosaurs. As always, keep exploring and keep growing.